We're back in 2026 and here for you this year as we cover the variety of stories hitting general practice. And we're going to kick off this episode with one story that's definitely dominated the GP headlines and a few of the ones that you may have come across. If not, we're going to share them with you as ever. Can you tech enhance your primary care and learning? Let's get cracking, shall we? Hello, GP learners. Welcome to this episode where myself and Andy are going to cover all the latest stuff that's happening in 2026, 8 days in. And we've always really got a bevy of stories to go through, haven't we, Andy?
We have indeed. I was hoping we might be talking about the neighbourhood guidance, which is maybe dropping middle of this month. But no, we've got sort of 4 other stories to talk through that I think will be interesting to pick apart this evening.
Definitely. So just to give you a rough idea of what we're going to cover in this episode, so we're going to be talking about one story that's definitely been dominating a lot of the GP social media stuff. So much so that I think the algorithm has taken over. I know on my phone it definitely did because it was the only thing that kept popping up like numerous times. And that's a story about a GP that unfortunately has had sanctions put on them by the GMC. But this has deeper roots that we are definitely going to be talking about. In addition, we're going to be covering some other news stories that have also happened, including the buyout of EMIS is back on the table, aspects of fit notes, and then finally talking about neighbourhoods, because it wouldn't be an episode in 2026 if we didn't talk about neighbourhoods, would it, Andy?
Yeah, we've got to get something in there about neighbourhoods. It's important, but it's not the guidance yet. But it's an interesting story nonetheless. But that will be coming up towards the end of the episode. Shall we dive in and go with story 1 then, Gandhi, and pick that one apart a little bit?
Yeah. So this is a new story that hit the headlines just a couple of days ago. And as I said, it's a bit weird because it has, for lack of better words, dominated social media, particularly when it comes to general practice side of social media. And I'm not joking. Every social media platform I've gone on, this is the story that the algorithms just keep sending to me. I don't know if it's been the same for you, Andy, but I just couldn't get away from it.
Yeah, everywhere, and quite strong sort of feelings and thoughts about it being expressed as well. So the story we're talking about is it's quite close to home because it has occurred in Nottingham. So we're sort of being respectful in terms of how we're addressing this tonight. I think we felt that we had to because it's been such big news, but been quite sensitive. There's many sides to every story. And I think we're going to sort of come at this really from more of a sort of thematic kind of perspective rather than going into the specifics or details of the case. Nonetheless, probably helpful, Gandhi, to just let people know what it is that we're actually talking about.
Yeah, so the story effectively goes around the fact of a GP working at a practice whereby that clinician felt that they had to block out some appointments that they were due to have later in the day. So then that meant that they were able to leave a little bit early to go pick up their children for school. And as a result of that, in the process of that, did some documentation that suggested that they had seen patients that were then not seen in the practice. The outcome of that was that this was then later found by other members of the team. And then discussions happened, and then the GP in question then referred themselves to the GMC. This happened in 2024, so this is not a recent story. This is, as we see with most of the things that go through the GMC, do take quite a lot of time. And as a result of that, the kind of judgments and stuff have just come out recently, and part of that has been a 5-month suspension that's been placed upon the GP in terms of working. Now, this story evokes a lot of aspects that I think have definitely been discussed in quite a lot of detail, particularly in which parts you go to in terms of forums and that kind of stuff. It's become quite heated in some places as well, and I think parts.
What have people been saying then, Gandhi?
Well, apparently there's loads of stuff coming from other countries as well about this, in terms of particularly the concept of working as, and I believe that the clinician in play was a single mother, so therefore the extra pressures having to look after a family and maintaining a career, and potentially some of those attributions of who's to blame being placed in different cohorts. Is it the employer? Is it the person individual? Is it the system? I think these are some of the things that I think we felt we wanted to talk more around the system aspects, because the individual things, I think, from the employer, from the person themselves, we don't know all the details. That's the first thing. We know what we have in terms of the summary judgments and the MPTS documentation, which is publicly available if people want to have a look. But it does come to, I think, that there are questions around why the clinician felt that that was the step they had to take, what led up to that, and actually some of the wider stuff that comes in play. And I think I'll let Andy come in before I go into more of that.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to, I guess, think about the circumstances that lead to something like this happening. And again, we're just sort of speculating, but you can sort of see the kind of position that the profession is in, generally speaking, in terms of there being long hours. General practice is often talked about as being one of the more flexible areas of medicine to work in. And whilst in terms of some of the kind of big decisions, and in theory, if you are able to achieve that flexibility, with an understanding employer, or design your career in that way, that's certainly something that can be achieved in general practice. But for many people working in general practice, that's not their day-to-day. So certainly not their experience, say, within a day when they are scheduled to work. Often those days are really, really long, with a lack of, flexibility, but also a lack of sort of predictability, or it can be quite unpredictable, and it can be difficult to negotiate working patterns that allow people to properly participate in care roles and so forth. So I think I just sort of think that you can see how, given the state of the profession, the circumstances could exist where somebody is really backed in a corner, on an issue around childcare, and has to quickly make some quick, decisions about how to achieve something they really need to achieve in terms of picking up kids. It's just, I just think it's a very difficult, position.
I think there's an aspect of, no matter how well you plan your day as well, sometimes things just happen that unfortunately still will delay you. And then potentially that concept of, is that going to have a knock-on impact? There's been numerous times, for example, I know I've needed to be somewhere. I've tried my best to manage my clinic, to, adjust things, even going in early so I could clear the books, so that hopefully that I could leave on time. And all it takes is for you to then have a patient that has significant other needs or something else happen that therefore means that you are put so far behind. I know that many patients probably do get frustrated with the fact that they probably go to the practice and they're seen late and everything, but there's often really good reasons why that's happening, because the appointment books are packed so tightly with trying to fit as many patients in. I think it's a problem that's definitely felt worse since the shift to 8 to 6:30, and in particular that pressure many practices are probably feeling about having to see patients towards the 6 to 6:30 period, in particular with this shift of being open all the time and not being able to say that they're closed and things. And I think that's caused possibly some additional pressures, but being quite clear that the case in mention happened before the 8 to 6:30 shift that we saw in October. But I can understand the pressures that people feel. I think, if we were talking about the case, there's something about, as Andy mentioned, there is flexibilities potentially with general practice. And it's what that looks like in terms of discussion with the employer, with the clinician. Is this about trying to, have more access versus what does that look like for patients? What does that look like for clinicians themselves? I think there are different aspects to that. But as a reflection, Andy, I can give you one from today. So I was meant to pick up my children from school, and something happened at work, and it basically meant I had to stay a bit longer. I was fortunate enough to have my wife that could go and pick up the kids. But, I definitely felt that pressure of trying to figure out, how am I going to get my kids sorted?
Well, Gandhi, I've sort of felt pressure. I don't have kids. I've got a dog. Sometimes you need to get back for the dog. And I also feel really fortunate that I have a partner who is able to be much more flexible than me, and be around if someone needs to get back earlier than 7:30, 8 o'clock at night to do something with the dog. There's someone else who can do that. If I was a single parent, actually the situation would be much, much more difficult. I also, wonder if we're seeing the remnants of some of those elements of masochistic kind of culture around medicine that have traditionally been out there, where people perhaps don't necessarily feel that they can admit that they, have personal needs that mean that they might not be able to operate at certain times, or might need certain accommodations to allow them to work as a medic, within the life that they have,
Yeah.
and that's both, I guess, on that person admitting it, but also on other people being receptive to having those conversations and understanding other people's situations in terms of designing the jobs. Obviously, we don't know the circumstances of this particular case, but it just makes me just reflect about where we're at, and I'm a partner, and just thinking about how receptive we are to people when they come with care issues, and I'm going to say, are we as understanding to the GPs when they come and have these conversations as we might be to other members of staff? Because I think that whilst we'd say we treat everybody equal, we might actually have different expectations of fellow medics in terms of how they or when they will come in if they're ill, or if they have other commitments, compared to the expectations we have from other members of staff. I appreciate I may be entering into a difficult area here, but I wonder if I have different expectations myself, and certainly of myself, in terms of illness. I'm quite a big I'm quite guilty of, say, presenteeism, personally. I know we're moving into slightly different territory, but
well, it's an interesting
turning up
point,
and
Andy.
going
So you
to
talk
work
about
with significant health
presenteeism.
problems,
Well, it's an interesting one. I think one that I'd be keen to ask, the people watching us live and those who are probably watching this on the recorded episode and stuff, that concept of presenteeism is definitely a challenge within the medical profession. We know that's the case. And, we are in the midst of cold and flu season, lots of people probably feeling not well. Should they be going to work in that aspects? And, how does that function in terms of the care that they're offering? Again, example myself, a couple of weeks back, I had a bit of a nasty cold. I managed to make it through the morning, got to the afternoon, I was gone, and I just knew I couldn't see patients, and I had to say to the rest of the team, I'm really sorry, but I just can't do anything, and that was despite medicating myself and everything else. I stayed in the practice as support for the team, but I recognized I probably wasn't going to make great clinical decisions. So I took myself off clinical and just provided support to the team in terms of, just pastoral support, I think, more than anything else. Fortunate that as a partner, I've probably got a bit more flexibility to do that. But I think, I'm sure there are many people who probably plod on and try and still see patients. Interestingly, I probably was worse than some of the patients I was seeing. But
yeah, I've been with that situation of nipping out. Oh, it sounds awful. This was years ago, but having to leave like mid consultation to go and vomit in the toilet, and things like that. Maybe I shouldn't be admitting to that on it. I'm confident I was able to safely see patients, but did need to take a break or two to go and do that. So I think now, actually being a bit more senior, I would excuse myself from work. But I felt, there was something about the culture around medicine that meant that I felt that I needed to do that somehow. And I think there's elements of that still around. So it's a really interesting area. We're starting to get some comments through, Gandhi.
Well, yeah, I was just going to mention, so comment from, becoming EGP learning regular, Jayesh Puri talking about, I think all partners suffer with presenteeism. I think that's definitely a common trait we're seeing in terms of, particularly partners working probably harder than they should be. I know I'm probably going to be in that category and stuff. And I think, the concept, because it is the business, because it is maintaining the staffing and all the other kind of stuff, that's definitely an aspect. We had another comment from Chanced something or other number, which country? I think this was in contrast to possibly my comment about other countries commenting on this news story. So I've seen loads of posts from Americans in particular.
So what do they say?
Well, interestingly, very condemning of the fact of an employment structure that requires somebody to, have an impact on their childcare, which I find a bit weird, because American employment structures are very...
I thought you were going to say like a Scandinavian country, that we would expect to have better employment rights and, for carers and so forth. I wasn't expecting you to say America. That's interesting.
Sorry, it's just because I've had loads of posts about, tipping in America and the tipping culture and how that's thought to be and stuff. So I guess that's probably what I was reflecting on, the fact that it seemed a bit of a weird place for those kind of comments to come from, given the employment structures that currently exist in America. They have obviously other challenges when it comes to that side of things, but hey ho. But then Jay Shapiro is coming back with, we've had a lot of debates around trainees now, and they've put their own health as much higher priority. So it does seem to be shifting. I think I agree with that. There's definitely a generational shift we're seeing in terms of how clinicians are coming through, in terms of, are they fit to work health wise, work-life balance, or whatever you want to call it. Because I know people don't like the concept of balance. I think it's a different terminology people are preferring to use nowadays. But there is this aspect of, making sure you are healthy and safe to work. I think that's probably a great segue, isn't it, Andy, into our next story.
I was going to take us via a slightly different area as well, and just
go for it.
One of my favorite things at the last GP5T online conference for GP trainers was the session on Generation Z trainers, Generation Z trainees and Generation X trainers. It was really, really interesting. And there was a really great exploration of the cultural differences and the tension across that generational divide when trainers are dealing with trainees, but also how they've perhaps got something to teach each other in terms of that emphasis on work-life balance from potentially younger trainees, and potentially more emphasis on the work side of the balance from some of the trainers, not universally, but maybe stereotypically. And there is another GP5T conference coming up on the 7th of February. Just flashing it up on screen, and there's the link there if people want to come along. But it's great, and there are traditional sessions about the AKT and other assessments and more traditional topics in terms of supporting trainees. But there's also these off the wall sessions that focus on things like dealing with that generational divide and neurodiversity, and how what we can learn from elite sports performance that's relevant for training. It's a really great conference. So just thought we'd weave in that plug on our way to FitNotes.
Yes. So I guess we've talked a little about sickness. I think one of the interesting news stories that came out recently was about the fact that there were 40,000 fit notes issued per day, and that should we be changing the way that fit notes are issued? This comes from a news article by a think tank. I think it was called the CSJ, was it?
Yeah, Centre for Social Justice. So they've done some work that estimates that there were 11 million fit notes issued last year. That works out to be 40,000 fit notes per day. They feel that this is a very high number, and it does feel like a really high number, doesn't it? And that this is obviously happening at a time where we are hearing a lot about lower productivity rates and higher non-participation in work due to sickness across the population. So it's something that's quite a hot political issue. And they are making a further call for the role of GPs in issuing longer term sick notes to be reduced. And they're calling for, in fact, there's a nice little breakout box here. They're calling for some occupational health support actually to be done separately to GPs, and for sick notes to be handled by that service. Letting you come in, Gandhi. Can you hear me okay?
I can. I don't know if that was you or me. I'd love it if the GP listeners can tell us if that was me or Andy that went a bit fritzy. But we seem to be back now, Andy.
That's fine. So, I mean, that's it. Essentially the story. It got me thinking about a few things, really. So one of the thoughts I had was, actually, I remember a time where we would do sick notes quite short term, but if someone was off sick for about between 3 and 6 months with the same condition, the Department of Work and Pensions would take it upon themselves to do a fitness for work assessment, and we'd often get a letter back saying, actually, we've deemed this person can work with this illness. Please do not issue further notes for this same illness. So it felt like actually there was a time where things were different, and actually longer term sick notes were taken out of the hands of the GPs. I think that got cut or reduced at some point as the government was tightening its belts and reducing spending on areas that it didn't feel was important. So I sort of see some of these calls as just taking us back to where we were a few years ago and find it a little bit bemusing. As a GP, I think it's useful to be able to sign people off for short periods of time, definitely. And actually, they're saying actually for periods of sort of 3 or 4 weeks that they still think there's a significant role for the GP in that. I do think that sometimes when people are off for longer periods of time, it is harder for me as a GP now to support that person in conversations and activities to support them back to work in a way that maybe we could in the past, when people would there was a time when people would had to book a face-to-face appointment to renew their sick note or to get a sick note, and that gave a great opportunity to have conversations with patients about how actually there is an enormous evidence base that shows us that being in work is really good for people's physical health, good for people's mental health, good for the length of their life and the quality of their life. That tells us actually we should be doing all that we can to get people back to work. And I just feel, unfortunately, that we don't have as much opportunity with that. I think it might be something to do with the shift of some of these. What are when you're looking at the impact of consultations on a day-to-day basis, these are the sorts of things that get moved first to telephone appointments, where I think you can be less impactful in terms of something that really needs you to sometimes convince patients of what's possible for them. And then actually even some of the sick note workers now move to, electronic consultations now, where there's even less opportunity to interact positively with the patient to influence return to work and support them with that. So I think there's a few factors driving this, and on the whole, I agree that this is probably a good idea. What were your thoughts on this, Gandhi?
So I think I agree as well. I think the concept of longer term sick notes being taken out of the GP's responsibility, I think, is an important part, because one of the things it makes reference to is the fact that GPs don't actually have occupational health training in the context of being able to offer that advice in the place of employment. And I absolutely agree with that. We are not occupational health specialists. Often what a lot of companies will do is hope that we are and try and bypass routes in order to get a GP's perspective on things. And actually, often what I will say to a lot of those employers is that you need an occupational health specialist to comment on how this person would work in that particular role, because we don't see the person in their working environment. That's the key thing, isn't it? I think there's a separate part that comes for those people who are work finding. So those people who do not have a job, who are then limited in terms of what they can do and come to us for the fit note, which also then acts as a doorway into other parts of benefit services. And that's because that's the way the government, DWP, have created the system, that it is the fit note that allows you to get access to all the variety of other benefits. And if you don't have that, that then creates challenge. And I think that's the conflict point I don't enjoy. And I think it's also one that doesn't really do a great service to the patient, because, as you said, it's one of those consultations we probably have shifted towards more of an online route or a remote route, because it's quicker and easier to manage that particular workload, which I think is also compounded by other factors in society. So, for example, we talked about, the fact access to benefits is based on fit note acquisition. I think there's very much a perception from the profession about the job centres telling people to get a fit note, because they feel that this person is more challenging to get into a working environment, and therefore the easier option is, here's your piece of paper, or now a digital version that allows you exemption from it. But then there's also the fact that many people are actually struggling to work because they're waiting for other things to happen. And this is possibly a symptom of the bigger challenges within the NHS, for example, the long wait lists, the fact that people are having to wait for investigations that's taking longer, certain aspects of the healthcare system that unfortunately aren't on a timely basis. And that delays things compared to where we were maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely, Gandhi. There are those sick notes where we're issuing another fit note saying not fit for work for someone who's awaiting an orthopedic procedure, say on their shoulder or on their knee, that would enable them to return to the job that they are currently off from. People waiting for gallbladder removals, cholecystectomies, things like that can leave people unable to work. So yeah, some of this is perhaps a symptom of wider NHS waiting list issues as well.
And not just that, I think society as well, Andy. So I know before, when we were talking about what to talk about, I mentioned about the fact that I have this personal view that I think society as a whole has shifted, that you can't be sick anymore. So, for example, if you have a cough or a cold, majority are going to be viral. And actually, the best way to combat that is to just get some rest, fluids, bed rest, etc. And we've talked already about presenteeism with healthcare professionals. I think there's also an element of expectation from employers. Oh, you've just got a cold. You can keep working. You don't need to be off. Or you need certification to prove that you can't come into work, because we've become a more bureaucratic society, which does require a doctor's note for pretty much everything nowadays, because HR departments and stuff have bureaucratized everything. Society has made it in the sense that, you can't be unwell anymore. You just can't take a sick day, or you can't just rest, when actually that's probably what you need. And similarly, I think it happens in things like bereavements and other aspects, because life just seems busier now and people aren't allowed to do that. And I think that is a symptom of society and the way it's shifted, the immediacy of everything that has to happen. Is it Amazon culture? I don't know. There's various societal and probably far smarter people than you and I that could debate and discuss this. But I think that it is a multifactorial aspect that's led us to this point. Do I disagree with the CSJ that it should be taken away from GPs? Probably not, to be honest. But I'd be interested to know what people watching this are thinking, because I suspect there may be some GPs who think differently. Be interesting to hear their views.
I would be interested to hear people's views, actually. I mean, and they're suggesting that we would still issue notes for short-term illness. It's just the longer-term stuff to take offers, which I think is really quite sensible, I think. I was interested to hear your comments about perhaps an increase in presenteeism. And I wonder if it's a little bit polarized with that, being present with kind of maybe certain people, perhaps people in employment in general. If you have a job, maybe there's expectations around presenteeism, because a lot of people would point to the increased proportion of people who are not participating in the workforce due to being unwell, and an increase in mental health conditions amongst that as well. And I don't think we fully understand what's happening there. Maybe sort of changing attitudes to being sick, and when we participate in work, when we are feeling unwell, rates of those illnesses. Is society just generally just more toxic? And actually the solution to this doesn't lie with changing how we issue sick notes, but changing other things about society. It's an interesting area.
Yep. Speaking of which, I guess a comment from one of our not listeners, viewers, again from Chase Puri. Also frustratingly, hospital specialists either not providing the notes or not giving appropriate length on discharge. So I think that's a varied story. I know that in Nottingham, that they put loads of effort into trying to support this, and that has had pretty good impact in terms of a lot of places giving the fit notes when their patient's being discharged. I probably would agree with the latter part. I think sometimes there's still that propensity to default to just 2 weeks for some weird reason. So, if a person's had shoulder surgery, chances are they're not going to be back to work in 2 weeks, to be honest. They're probably going to need it a little bit longer. Similar patients with heart attacks, I've still seen them come out of hospital with just a 2-week sick note. And to be honest, if you've had a heart attack, you're not going back to a manual labour job in 2 weeks. Let's be honest on that one. So, maybe something about that. The interesting one that the CSJ article does also mention is about the concept of the fact that a few years back, actually more clinicians could provide fit notes. So it was expanded to also include nurses, physiotherapists, and pharmacists. But actually the uptake of number of those types of clinicians providing fit notes hasn't really increased on a significant level. And it is predominantly still GPs that are providing the fit notes. And it does raise a question about that level of training, that level of confidence that comes into play, and how people have worked within those roles to provide that certification at appropriate points.
There's, but also an avenue to for improvements as well, in terms of if you're thinking about how to staff up, say, this new service that's going to be handling longer term sick notes. You might not want to take GPs away from frontline. It might be that you can use other health professionals. Of course, we need those at the front line as well, and maybe giving sick notes is frontline. But there's certainly a wider pool of staff that could be used to staff that sort of service. So
I'd agree on that. And I think definitely having a MDT approach potentially would be a really good one, in terms you could easily conceive yourself having something like a group clinic with a physiotherapist, a nurse, and an OT specialist potentially helping to understand patients, particularly with that more chronicity aspects as to what is capable, what isn't capable, and what is appropriate for them to be looking at as well. Who knows?
And land people with the professional that's most relevant to the problem that they're experiencing within that
Mhm.
multidisciplinary team. Yeah. So, okay, yeah, sounds like we weren't too outraged by that story. So that's quite positive. Good.
Mhm.
So
Next up.
next, so EMIS is set to be bought by another US company, US private equity company this time, TPJ Private Equity Group, I think, is buying EMIS. So EMIS, provider of clinical record systems in the UK. I think, are they the largest provider in the UK? I think I'm seeing
It's
reference
part of
that
the
we've got
duopoly between them and System One. So, those are the two big names when it comes to medical records provision.
4,000 practices, says
Yeah.
here. It says 3/5 of all practices,
Okay.
but that may or may not be right, and it may not be 3/5 of all patients. So
No.
probably still open sport on who's the biggest. Yeah, so EMIS has changed hands a few times recently, haven't they, Gandhi?
Well,
To
so they were
remind,
bought out by Optum, which is a subsidiary of United Health, back in October 2023, I want to say. And that makes an interesting point that, just about 2 years later, it's potentially, let's be clear, it's not been sold yet. It is up for sale. And there is, clear suggestions that the TPG group are looking to invest
could
and take over purchasing of the EMIS system. What I thought was interesting is that it looks like the numbers are a little bit different. So TPG are offering 1 billion pounds or dollars. I can't remember which one it was.
it says pounds in the article,
Yep.
so hopefully
Compared to 1.2, which is what Optum Health paid for EMIS 2 years ago. So it's actually devalued a little bit potentially in that sense.
it's interesting. I was thinking about what could be going on there. You're right. The value of the asset might have gone down. I wonder. Sometimes they do like debt leverage buyouts, and
Mm-hmm.
then if you're then selling that on the entity that has more debt is less valuable, and goodness knows what. And have they removed some of the assets or value as they've?
Maybe. Or
I
is
don't know,
this?
but yes, but the sticker price has gone
Well,
down, which
Well,
is
the other
interesting.
thing I'm going to suggest is this the Medicus effect. So one of the things that we know that has changed since then is obviously we now have an additional EPR provider in the market that has taken off over the past few months. In fact, we had one of the first users transfers from EMIS to Medicus on the channel a couple of weeks ago, joining us, Amar Amfari. He joined us for our Christmas episode. And whether that's had an impact in the valuation of EMIS as a provider, given the fact that there's now an alternative provider, and particularly where there's been a few transitions from EMIS to Medicus itself.
Yeah, it's certainly set to become an interesting marketplace in the next few years with new entrants coming in
Mm-hmm.
like Medicus and others. I'm interested to think about where this leaves TPP as well, the owner of System One, because we've often sort of speculated, is anyone going to buy TPP? They're perhaps left as a much kind of smaller fish compared to EMIS. And I think both systems, certainly maybe compared to some of the new entrants like Medicus, look like they could do with some investment in their capabilities and their user interface and usability, and the way that they integrate things like AI and voice transcription service. I can't necessarily speak for EMIS, actually, more for System One, but it's certainly looking like it might need a refresh to remain competitive, and that doesn't come cheap. And it's helpful if you've got an owner with deeper pockets to make those investments. So it's interesting to think about the position of TPP within this. I wonder if we could see a buyout in the future, but who knows? Maybe that should have been my prediction for 2026, perhaps.
Oh, wow. I believe it was mine a couple of years ago, wasn't it? Acquisitions and changeovers and stuff and things.
Yeah.
But hey. I think what is interesting about TPG, so they already do run other aspects of data storage and APRs. So there's potentially some synergies, I think, if they were to become the potential owner, and how that may look in terms of functioning with hopefully functionality changes for EMIS. I know that's been one of the key things many people have been questioning, that one of the hopes that when Optum did take over EMIS, that there would be some significant changes, and particularly shift towards EMIS X. We're seeing that, but it's still, to be fair, really snail pace that it seems to be going. So it'd be interesting to see whether that would change things or not. Who knows? Time will tell.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think they want with EMIS? Is it kind of UK market share, or I guess they
I
must
mean, at
have
the end of the day, the UK EPR market is still one of the most data-rich healthcare resources in the
the data.
world. It is, one of the most detailed data services because of the way that the UK healthcare system works, and I guess there's value in data. We know that.
Yeah, or developing products with the data in terms of how you manage it. Yeah, absolutely. Well, interesting. I guess we'll watch this space. We always keep an eye out for these the deals happening within the health tech space, particularly around the record providers. So let's watch that space.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, it wouldn't be a EGP Learning show in 25, 26 tail end that doesn't talk about neighborhoods, and we're definitely talking about this one. And it's a question of whether or not the neighborhood model will be attractive or not. Do you want to lead us through this story, Andy?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I mean, I think we were hoping that we'd have the guidelines here, but instead we have this story about neighbourhoods. And so the government has been warned that the success of the neighbourhood health model, which is obviously a big part of the 10-year plan and has been a big part of forward-looking policy documents for quite a long time, the success depends on people wanting to work in the community, essentially. So the making the community and including general practice an attractive place to work. What's triggered this story is that somebody called Layla Moran, who's a politician, she's the chair of the Health Select Committee in Parliament, has written to Karen Smith, who is another politician, who is the secondary care minister, so working in secondary care, to highlight the differences between working in primary and secondary care, and stating that actually this puts at risk that shift from hospital to community, because staff need to feel attracted to working in the community and making that shift. So I guess that's what's behind it. The letter itself is interesting, and it breaks down. So we've kind of gone a little bit behind the story here, and had a look. So talk about a number of kind of issues across that primary secondary care divide. So lower status attached to working community settings traditionally. I guess if we all think back to medical school and how people in the hospital talked about general practice and community services, and I gather from the medical students that I interact with at the practice that there's still an element of that happening. So that's certainly still an issue. Lack of emphasis on training in the community setting, fewer opportunities for career progression. These are all things which I think are present for GPs. I know I tried to do a training course to be funded by the apprenticeship money, by the apprenticeship levy last year, and I'm a GP partner. I'm technically self-employed. I don't have an employer. Can't access the apprenticeship levy to do that training, which would have probably benefited my development in the practice and other roles I do, for example. So fewer opportunities for training and progression. It goes on. Generally lower pay on average for similar roles in the community setting, and the lack of that capacity to train more people, to supervise people, and to support each other. Sort of investment in time and infrastructure around peer support within the community. So those were the main points. Any thoughts, Gandhi, about this? Do you think there's a genuine threat from this issue to neighbourhood model?
I think the concern that seems to come through is the fact that community working has seemed to always have less of a sheen or less of a gleam when it comes to working in a big fancy hospital. But actually, if we want more people to work in the community, you need to make it attractive. Otherwise, they're not going to want to work in the community, because there are aspects in terms of working conditions, and we've talked a little bit around that in the fact that working, for example, in general practice is probably a little bit more flexibility compared to hospital-based things. But I think there is also that aspect of making it financially attractive and not doing a disservice there, and I think that is very valid. I think this does possibly speak to bigger questions we've got around neighbourhoods. What does it look like? We know that we've got these potential new contracts coming through in terms of SMPs and MNPs. How are they going to function in terms of making the care aspect delivered through neighbourhoods working effectively? We still have no detail. As Andy mentioned, we've been waiting for this for several weeks now. It is delayed again in terms of being available for us. So, but I think it's just a stark warning to not, if this is going to be the delivery of care model that you want, you need to make sure that you are investing appropriately to make sure that people want to work there. Otherwise, what is the point?
Absolutely. Just think about Layla Moran, chair of the Health Select Committee. I remember when Jeremy Hunt was chair of the Health Select Committee, and they published that report that was actually fairly positive in terms of speaking to the value of general practice, which surprised us at the time. So just
right before he became chancellor again, and then seemed to not want to invest any money in general practice again.
Yeah, well, I guess that was following the trust budget, and oh gosh,
yeah.
Let's not get too political at this point in the episode. Yeah, so I guess those are the main stories that we picked up on. It's been an interesting start to the year, and we're still waiting and anticipating some of those big documents to drop later in the year.
So Andy, we did forget to do something.
Oh gosh,
we did, didn't we? Do you still want to go for it?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, so this is our game on our wavelength that me and Andy like to do. We normally would have given you guys a little bit more time, but obviously we've kind of forgot to do it and stuff. But do you want to summarize it, Andy, or do you want me to do it?
I will summarize it. So this is a wavelength meter. Okay. We will spin the meter, and the target wavelength will be revealed within the meter, and then it will be closed. Gandhi will give us a category or a question, and then it will be there will be one extreme and another extreme that you could provide answers to in this category. I will then give a circumstance that equates to the position on the scale between one extreme and the other. I will try and communicate that by giving a situation or bit of information, and then Gandhi has to estimate where the wavelength meter is based on the information I've given him. It will maybe be more apparent when we actually do it, but it is quite good fun. So I'm going to spin the meter, Gandhi. Well, you've got some cards there that normally set the category for us. So.
I did, however, not. So as you can tell, we're doing it slightly differently this time because Andy's actually got the wavelength device because he's got one now. So I haven't got mine out. So okay. I'm just going to come up with one. So Andy, I've got one. Go for it. Even better.
Yeah. Okay. So it's length of sick note. Okay.
Okay.
And on this side of the meter, it is we'll say 2 weeks. Okay. And on this side of the meter, it is we're going to say 6 months. Very rarely would do a sick note for that long. Okay.
Okay.
So I guess I take a peek and see where it is. Okay. Right. So what I'm going to say, and so dial there for the moment. So what I'm going to say to you, Gandhi, is this is a 40-year-old man who has been admitted following a compound fracture to their right tibia that's been treated with internal fixation with a tibial nail. This person works as a bricklayer. Okay. So what length of sick note will you give him?
So from that, we've got a fairly nasty fracture with surgical inputs and a manual labor job.
That's right.
I'm going to put that. So for me, I can't see that being anything less than 12 weeks. I am not an orthopod. I'll be very clear on that point. But I would estimate that your minimum you're looking at there is 12 weeks.
Okay, 6 months, 2 weeks. So whereabouts do you want the dial, Gandhi?
So 12 weeks it is 3 months. So pretty much in the middle. Okay, I'm just going to go, just because I don't like it being in the middle, I'm just going to go slightly more to the right for you.
So is that way?
No, yeah, but a bit more back, bit more back. There, that'll do.
Okay.
Let's go for it. Not far off.
Look at that. We're on each other's wavelengths today.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, okay. That's not bad, actually. Yeah. We got 2 of a potential 4 points there. It would have been 4 if you were absolutely bang on. So great. Okay. On the same wavelength, that's a positive place to draw things to a close.
It is. And I guess this is a game that we love to play. We've been doing this for several sessions. So if it's the one that you enjoy doing, definitely let us know if we should keep doing this in 2026. I know for a fact that we probably will be doing this at GP5T. So if you do want to join us for GP5T11, then make sure you join us. The link to that is there on the screen. So it's bit.ly/GP5T11, all case sensitive. Additionally, you can join the 50 plus other people coming to join us for PCM Plus 2026. This is mine and Andy's conference with Ben and Tara. And we talk about the contract, PCNs, networks, neighborhoods, various other stuff. And the link for that is bit.ly/PCM Plus 26. Again, all case sensitive and capitals there for you. That will take you through to the link. Andy's flashing it up on screen. You definitely want to join us. Last year, we sold out. We had no capacity whatsoever. We are definitely on track to do that again this year. So if you want to come and join us in April 22nd in Nottingham for our conference, sign up now before you don't have the ability, because it did sell out last year with a month to go. So this is your chance to do so. And actually, me and Andy have got some other cool content coming for you in the next few weeks. Inevitably, at some point, we're going to have that neighborhood contract that we guarantee we'll be covering, as well as various other things for you as we, as ever, continue to tech enhance your primary care and learning. We'll catch you guys in the next episode.